The HOA president slid her master key into the lock and turned it. The door opened. She stepped inside the house without permission. Without a warrant. Without the owner's knowledge. She believed she had every right to be there. She believed her position as HOA president gave her authority to enter any home in the community whenever she felt it was necessary. She walked through the living room. She took photographs with her phone. She opened closets. She looked through rooms. She made notes on her clipboard about violations she claimed to see. She spent nearly 20 minutes inside the house. Then she locked the door behind her and left. The homeowner was out of town. Away on business. They had no idea their home had been invaded. They had no idea someone had walked through their private space without permission. They had no idea their privacy had been violated. But the homeowner wasn't just anyone. The person whose home had been illegally entered wasn't some ordinary resident who could be intimidated or pushed around. The homeowner was a federal judge. Someone who understood the law better than almost anyone. Someone who knew exactly what crimes had just been committed. Someone with the knowledge, the resources, and the authority to make sure there were serious consequences. When the judge returned home and checked the security footage, everything changed. The HOA president's face was clearly visible on camera. The timestamp showed exactly when she'd entered. The footage showed her walking through every room. The evidence was undeniable. And the HOA president had no idea what was about to happen to her. Judge Margaret Chen had been on the federal bench for 15 years. She'd worked her way up through the legal system over a distinguished career. She'd been a prosecutor. She'd been a defense attorney. She'd taught constitutional law at the university level. And for the last decade and a half, she'd been a federal district judge presiding over some of the most complex legal cases in the region. Her job was demanding. It required long hours. It required travel to different courthouses. It required complete focus and dedication. Cases she presided over often involved constitutional questions, federal crimes, and civil rights violations. She understood the law at the deepest level. She'd spent her entire professional life studying it, interpreting it, and applying it. When she decided to purchase a home in the Riverside Estates HOA community, it was a practical decision. The location was convenient. It was halfway between the two federal courthouses where she most frequently presided. The commute was manageable. The neighborhood was quiet. The home itself was modest but comfortable. Perfect for someone who spent most of their time working. Judge Chen wasn't flashy. She didn't advertise her position. She didn't introduce herself as Judge Chen to neighbors. She was private. Professional. She kept her work life and her personal life separate. Most people in the community had no idea what she did for a living. She was just another resident. Just another homeowner paying HOA fees and following community rules. She was also respectful of rules and regulations. As someone who dedicated her life to the law, she understood the importance of following proper procedures. She paid her HOA fees on time. She maintained her property according to community standards. She attended HOA meetings occasionally when her schedule permitted. She was, by any measure, a model resident. Her schedule meant she was often away from home. Court sessions sometimes required her to be in another city for days at a time. Trials could run long. Complex cases demanded her full attention. She traveled regularly for work. This meant her home sat empty for extended periods. She was comfortable with this because she'd taken security precautions. The house had a comprehensive security system installed. Cameras covered all entry points. Motion sensors monitored the interior. The system recorded continuously and stored footage in the cloud. Judge Chen had installed this system specifically because of her frequent absences. She wanted to know if anything happened at her property while she was away. She wanted evidence if there was ever a problem. She also kept her home meticulously organized. Everything had a place. She would notice if things were moved or disturbed. This wasn't paranoia. This was the habit of someone with a legal mind. Someone who paid attention to details. Someone who understood that evidence and documentation mattered. Her relationship with the HOA had been minimal but professional. She'd read the HOA bylaws when she purchased the property. She understood what the HOA could and couldn't do. She understood the limits of their authority. She knew that HOA rules governed external property appearance and community standards, but that those rules didn't override constitutional rights or criminal law. She'd met the HOA president, Patricia Reynolds, a few times at community meetings. Their interactions had been brief and cordial. Judge Chen had no reason to think there would be any conflict. She followed the rules. She paid her fees. She maintained her property. There was no reason for the HOA to have any issue with her. What Judge Chen didn't know was that Patricia Reynolds had a very different understanding of HOA authority than what was actually legal. Patricia believed that being HOA president gave her powers that simply didn't exist. She believed she had the right to access any property in the community whenever she deemed it necessary. And Patricia Reynolds had no idea that the quiet, private woman who lived in the house on Maple Street was someone who could destroy her entire life with a single phone call. Patricia Reynolds had been HOA president for 6 years. 6 years of accumulating power and expanding her interpretation of what that power meant. She'd started reasonably enough. She'd focused on legitimate HOA concerns. Landscaping standards. Parking violations. Exterior paint colors. The normal stuff that HOAs are supposed to manage. But over time, her confidence in her authority had grown beyond reasonable limits. She'd started believing that being HOA president meant she had special access rights to all properties in the community. She'd convinced herself that inspection authority was unlimited. She'd told herself that she was responsible for everything that happened within the community boundaries, including inside people's homes. She had a master key. That was the starting point of the problem. The HOA had obtained master keys years ago under a previous administration for legitimate emergency purposes. The idea was that if there was a genuine emergency, if a pipe burst or a fire started and the homeowner was unreachable, the HOA could access the property to prevent further damage. That was the original intent. A narrow emergency provision. But Patricia had expanded that intent considerably. She'd started using the master key not for emergencies but for inspections. She believed she had the right to enter homes to check for violations. She believed that interior conditions were subject to HOA oversight. She believed her inspection authority extended inside front doors. She'd done it before. Multiple times. Other residents had come home to find things slightly moved. Papers disturbed. Closet doors not quite where they'd left them. Some residents suspected someone had been in their homes but couldn't prove it. They'd mentioned it to each other in hushed conversations. But nobody had security footage. Nobody had hard evidence. So nothing had been formally reported. Patricia had gotten away with it repeatedly. And that success had made her bolder. It had confirmed in her mind that she had the right to do what she was doing. If it were wrong, surely someone would have stopped her by now. The absence of consequences had become permission in her mind. She'd been watching Judge Chen's property for a few weeks. Not out of any specific concern initially. More out of habit. She watched all the properties. She made notes about everything she observed. She looked for any deviation from HOA standards that she could document and address. She'd noticed that Judge Chen was away frequently. She'd noticed packages accumulating on the porch on one occasion before being retrieved. She decided that the property needed an interior inspection. She told herself there were concerns about the condition of the interior. She told herself she needed to verify compliance with interior maintenance standards. In reality, there were no legitimate grounds for any inspection. Judge Chen's property was well maintained. The exterior was pristine. The lawn was kept. The house was painted correctly. There were no outstanding violations. There were no complaints from neighbors. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for Patricia Reynolds to enter that house. But she'd convinced herself otherwise. She'd rationalized the entry the way she always did. She was the HOA president. She had responsibilities. She had authority. She had a master key. And the homeowner was away, so there was no one to object. On a Tuesday morning, when she knew Judge Chen was scheduled to be in another city for a court session that would last several days, Patricia Reynolds walked up to the front door of the house on Maple Street. She looked around briefly. She took out her master key. She slid it into the lock and turned it. And she stepped inside a federal judge's home without permission, without a warrant, and without any legal authority whatsoever. Patricia walked through the front door with the confidence of someone who believed completely in her own authority. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't cautious. She moved through the entryway like she owned the place. Like this was a routine part of her job. Like entering someone's private home without permission was perfectly normal and acceptable behavior. She started in the living room. She looked around carefully. She took photographs with her phone. She documented the furniture arrangement. She noted the condition of the walls. She checked whether the flooring met some standard she'd invented in her own mind. She made notes on her clipboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Then she moved to the kitchen. She opened cabinet doors. She checked under the sink. She examined the appliances. She photographed things she deemed potentially relevant to HOA standards. Things that no HOA has any legitimate right to inspect. Things that are purely private. Things inside a person's home that no organization has the authority to scrutinize without permission or a legal warrant. She moved through the hallway. She opened doors. She looked into each room. She was thorough and systematic. She spent time in each space documenting what she saw. She was treating a federal judge's private residence like a property she had every right to examine. She was moving through someone else's most private space with complete disregard for that person's rights. What Patricia didn't know was that every single move she made was being recorded. The security system Judge Chen had installed was comprehensive and sophisticated. Cameras covered every room. Not just the entry points. Every room. The system had been installed by a professional security company that specialized in high-security residential systems. The kind of system that people install when they understand the value of documented evidence. The cameras captured Patricia's face clearly. They captured her hands opening drawers and cabinet doors. They captured her taking photographs with her phone. They captured her making notes on her clipboard. They captured the timestamp of every moment she was inside. The evidence being created in real time was overwhelming and irrefutable. Patricia spent approximately 25 minutes inside the home. She was thorough. She was systematic. She apparently felt completely comfortable taking her time. She had no fear of being caught because she genuinely believed she was within her rights. When she finally finished her self-appointed inspection, she walked back through the living room, out the front door, and locked it behind her with the master key. She went back to her own home and wrote up her inspection notes. She documented what she'd seen. She noted a few things she planned to cite as potential violations. Minor things. Things she'd have to stretch significantly to argue were legitimate HOA concerns. But she wrote them down anyway. She was building a file. She was creating documentation for violations she planned to pursue. She felt satisfied. She felt like she'd done her job. She felt like she'd fulfilled her responsibility as HOA president. She had no idea that everything she'd done was criminal. She had no idea that she'd just committed breaking and entering. She had no idea that she'd violated federal privacy rights. She had no idea that she'd created 25 minutes of crystal clear video evidence of her own crimes. And she had absolutely no idea that the person whose home she'd just violated was going to return in 3 days, check her security system as she always did after being away, and watch every single second of what Patricia Reynolds had done. She had no idea that the consequences coming her way were going to be swift, severe, and legally devastating. Judge Chen returned home on a Friday evening. She'd been away for 4 days presiding over a complex federal case. She was tired. She was ready to be home. She pulled into her driveway, gathered her bags, and unlocked her front door. The house looked normal from the outside. Nothing obviously disturbed. Nothing immediately alarming. But Judge Chen had a routine when she returned from trips. Before she unpacked. Before she made dinner. Before she did anything else. She checked her security system. She reviewed the footage from while she was away. This was habit. This was discipline. This was the behavior of someone who understood that evidence and documentation mattered. She sat down at her kitchen table with her laptop and pulled up the security system interface. She scrolled through the motion-triggered recordings from the past 4 days. Most of them were nothing. A delivery driver leaving a package. A neighbor's cat wandering across the porch. Normal things. Unremarkable things. And then she found Tuesday morning's recording. She saw a figure approach her front door. She watched the figure use a key. Her own lock. Her own front door. Being opened by someone who wasn't her and wasn't anyone she'd given permission to. She leaned forward. She watched carefully. The camera image was clear and sharp. She recognized Patricia Reynolds immediately. The HOA president. Walking into her home with a master key like she had every right to be there. Judge Chen watched the footage without moving. Without speaking. With the focused analytical attention of someone trained to assess evidence. She watched Patricia move through her living room. She watched her take photographs. She watched her open cabinet doors in her kitchen. Her mind was working rapidly. Not with panic. Not with simple anger. With precise legal analysis. She was mentally cataloging every crime being committed on her screen. Breaking and entering. Trespassing. Invasion of privacy. Illegal search of a private residence. Potential violations of federal civil rights statutes. The legal violations were stacking up with every minute of footage she watched. She watched all 25 minutes. Every second. She noted the timestamp. She noted the clarity of Patricia's face on camera. She noted specific actions that constituted specific crimes. She was building a mental case file with the instincts of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms understanding exactly what evidence looked like and exactly what it proved. When the footage ended, Judge Chen sat quietly for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. Not to call the HOA. Not to call Patricia Reynolds directly. She called the local police department's non-emergency line and reported a breaking and entering at her address. She explained that she had clear security footage of the incident. She explained that she could identify the perpetrator. She explained that she was preserving all evidence. The officer who took her call initially treated it like a routine report. But when Judge Chen explained who she was and described the evidence she had, the response changed. The officer said a detective would contact her that evening. Within 2 hours, a detective was at her door. She walked the detective through the footage systematically. She explained each action Patricia had taken and the specific legal violations each action represented. The detective was taking notes rapidly. The evidence was overwhelming. The footage was clear. The perpetrator was identifiable. This wasn't a complicated case. This was a straightforward criminal act captured completely on camera. The detective left with copies of the footage. A case had been opened. And Patricia Reynolds had no idea that her Tuesday morning inspection had just become the subject of a criminal investigation. The police moved quickly on this case. Partly because the evidence was so clear. Partly because the victim was a federal judge. Partly because breaking and entering is a serious crime that demands serious investigation. Within 48 hours of Judge Chen filing her report, detectives had reviewed all the evidence and were ready to move forward. Patricia Reynolds received a knock on her door on a Sunday morning. Two detectives stood on her porch. They identified themselves and asked if they could speak with her about an incident at a property in the community. Patricia invited them in confidently. She had no idea what was coming. She assumed it was some routine HOA matter. Something she could explain away with her standard justifications about inspection authority. The detectives asked her about Tuesday morning. They asked if she'd visited any properties in the community. They asked if she'd entered any homes. Patricia started explaining her inspection routine. She started talking about her HOA responsibilities. She started using the language she always used to justify her entries. She was calm. She was confident. She believed her position protected her. Then the detectives showed her the footage. They showed her the clear images of herself using a master key to enter Judge Chen's home. They showed her the footage of herself moving through every room. They showed her the timestamps. They watched her face as she watched herself on the screen. The confidence drained out of her immediately. She started backtracking. She started saying she thought she had the right to inspect properties. She said she was acting in her capacity as HOA president. She said there had been complaints about the property. She said she was just doing her job. Her excuses were coming fast and desperate. But the detectives weren't interested in HOA justifications. They explained clearly that HOA president is not a legal authority. They explained that HOA rules don't override criminal law. They explained that entering a private residence without permission, without a warrant, and without a legitimate emergency constitutes breaking and entering regardless of what position the person holds. They explained that she'd committed a crime. Patricia was formally charged with breaking and entering and criminal trespassing. She was given a court date. She was told she could face significant criminal penalties. For the first time in 6 years of overreaching her authority, she was facing real consequences. Not a complaint from a frustrated neighbor. Not an awkward conversation at an HOA meeting. Criminal charges from the police. Her shock was visible. This wasn't what she'd expected when she'd walked into that house on Tuesday morning. She'd expected to write up a few violation notices. She'd expected business as usual. Instead, she was being told she might face jail time and a permanent criminal record. Judge Chen also filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia Reynolds personally and against the HOA organization. The lawsuit alleged invasion of privacy, trespassing, violation of constitutional rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil suit sought significant damages. It named Patricia individually. It named the HOA board collectively for enabling a pattern of behavior that had led to this incident. The HOA board learned about the criminal charges and the civil lawsuit simultaneously. The emergency board meeting that followed was chaotic. Board members were panicking about their own liability. They were demanding to know how this had happened. They were asking why nobody had stopped Patricia's unauthorized entries before now. They were realizing that their failure to oversee her actions had made them legally vulnerable. And the community was about to find out everything. News travels fast in tight communities. Within days of Patricia's charges becoming public record, the entire HOA community knew what had happened. The details spread through neighborhood conversations, community forums, and local news coverage. A local reporter had picked up the story because it involved a federal judge. The story had elements that made it irresistible to media. A community authority figure. Criminal charges. A federal judge as the victim. It was compelling and the coverage was extensive. The community reaction was immediate and significant. Residents were shocked. Many were angry. But alongside the shock and anger came something else. Other residents started coming forward with their own stories. People who'd suspected Patricia had entered their homes started speaking up. People who'd noticed things moved or disturbed after periods away started connecting dots. People who'd felt uncomfortable but hadn't had proof started sharing their experiences. Within a week of the story breaking, the HOA board had received formal complaints from 7 other residents alleging unauthorized entry to their properties. 7 households describing similar experiences. Coming home to find things slightly different. Suspecting someone had been inside. Never having proof until now. Patricia's documented entry into Judge Chen's home had given them context for their own unsettling experiences. The HOA board was in crisis mode. They hired their own lawyer immediately. The lawyer's first advice was to suspend Patricia Reynolds from all HOA duties pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The board voted unanimously to suspend her. They also voted to immediately revoke all master keys and establish new protocols for property access that required written permission from homeowners. Patricia's lawyer reached out to Judge Chen's legal team early in the process, attempting to negotiate. He suggested that Patricia hadn't understood the limits of her authority. He suggested that she'd acted in good faith believing she had inspection rights. He suggested that the matter could be resolved without going through the full criminal and civil process. He was looking for any path to minimize the consequences his client was facing. Judge Chen's response through her legal team was clear. She wasn't interested in informal resolution. She wanted full accountability through proper legal channels. She wanted the criminal process to proceed. She wanted the civil lawsuit to move forward. She wanted there to be a documented legal record of what had happened. Not just for herself, but to establish clear precedent about what HOA presidents can and cannot do. This was important. Judge Chen understood that if Patricia's behavior was resolved quietly, if she escaped significant consequences, nothing would change. Other HOA presidents across the country operating under similar misconceptions about their authority would continue doing the same things. A clear legal outcome would send a message. It would establish that this kind of behavior has serious consequences. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia's lawyer negotiated with the prosecutor, but Judge Chen had made clear she wanted accountability. The prosecutor took the case seriously. The evidence was overwhelming. The victim was credible and legally sophisticated. The case was straightforward. Patricia eventually entered a guilty plea to criminal trespassing. The plea deal kept her from going to trial, but it resulted in a criminal conviction on her record. She received probation, community service, and was ordered to pay a fine. The conviction meant she had a permanent criminal record. It meant background checks would reveal her conviction. It meant her reputation in the community was permanently damaged. The civil lawsuit resulted in a settlement. The HOA's insurance carrier negotiated a financial settlement that compensated Judge Chen for the invasion of her privacy and the violation of her rights. The settlement amount was significant enough to reflect the seriousness of what had happened. The case raised important questions that went far beyond one HOA president and one unauthorized entry. It highlighted fundamental issues about HOA authority and the limits of that authority. Issues that affect millions of people living in HOA communities across the country. Issues that many homeowners don't fully understand until something like this happens. The first and most important principle is simple. HOA presidents are not law enforcement. They're not government officials. They're not investigators with special powers. They're volunteers or elected members of a private organization that manages community standards. That's it. Their authority extends to enforcing HOA bylaws through proper procedures. Fines for violations. Liens on properties for unpaid fees. Enforcement of rules about external property appearance. That's the scope of their legitimate authority. They have absolutely no legal right to enter private homes without permission. None. The fact that someone holds the title of HOA president doesn't change fundamental property rights. It doesn't override constitutional protections against unreasonable search. It doesn't give them authority to violate criminal trespassing laws. Position and title don't create legal immunity. Even the existence of a master key doesn't grant legal entry. Just because the HOA has a key to your property doesn't mean they can use it whenever they want. Key should exist only for genuine emergencies. A burst pipe flooding into neighboring units. A fire that requires immediate access. A medical emergency where someone inside needs help. Real emergencies where delay could cause serious harm. What constitutes an emergency has a specific legal definition. It doesn't include wanting to check if someone's interior paint color violates community standards. It doesn't include curiosity about how someone has decorated their home. It doesn't include routine inspections or compliance checks. Those things require permission. Written permission from the homeowner. Scheduled appointments. Proper notice. The legal requirements for entering someone's home are clear. Either the homeowner gives permission, or there's a warrant issued by a court, or there's a genuine emergency that justifies immediate entry. Those are the legal paths. HOA inspection authority is not a fourth path. It doesn't exist in criminal or constitutional law. What Patricia Reynolds did would be criminal if done by anyone. If a neighbor used a key to enter your home without permission, that's breaking and entering. If a stranger picked your lock and walked through your house, that's breaking and entering. The crime doesn't become legal just because the perpetrator holds a title in a homeowners association. Criminal law applies to everyone equally regardless of their position. The case also highlighted a systemic problem that exists in many HOA communities. HOA boards often fail to provide adequate oversight of their presidents. They allow individuals to accumulate unchecked power. They don't question overreach. They don't establish clear boundaries. They don't hold leadership accountable until something catastrophic happens. The Riverside Estates HOA board had allowed Patricia to operate without proper oversight for years. Other residents had suspected problems, but the board hadn't investigated. That failure of oversight made them partially liable in the civil lawsuit. Security systems proved critical in this case. Without video evidence, Patricia could have denied everything. She could have claimed she never entered the property. The case would have become her word against the judge's suspicions. But clear video footage eliminated any possibility of denial. It provided irrefutable evidence of exactly what happened and when. This reality should inform every homeowner's decision about security. If you live in an HOA community, especially one where leadership seems to operate with minimal accountability, security cameras protect you. They document what happens at your property when you're not there. They create evidence that can be used in criminal or civil proceedings if your rights are violated. So what should you take away from this story? What are the real lessons that apply to anyone living in an HOA community or considering buying property in one? Because this isn't just about one overreaching HOA president. This is about understanding your rights and knowing how to protect them. The first lesson is that you need to know your property rights. Really know them. Not just assume you know them. Your home is your private property. The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable search. HOA membership doesn't waive those constitutional protections. HOA bylaws don't override criminal law. Your home is your castle legally. No one enters without your permission or a warrant or a genuine emergency. Period. The second lesson is about reading HOA documents carefully before you buy. Look specifically at what the HOA claims as inspection rights. Look at master key policies. Look at entry provisions. If the bylaws claim broad inspection authority or unlimited entry rights, get a lawyer to review those provisions. Some HOA rules are legally unenforceable even if they're written in the bylaws. Knowing this before you buy protects you. The third lesson is about the importance of documentation. Judge Chen had security cameras throughout her home. That documentation was the difference between a he-said-she-said dispute and an open and shut criminal case. Invest in security systems. Especially if you travel frequently. Especially if your HOA leadership seems aggressive or overreaching. Document everything. Save emails. Record interactions when legal in your state. Documentation protects you when conflicts arise. The fourth lesson is that criminal behavior by HOA officials should be reported to police, not just handled internally. If someone enters your home without permission, that's a crime. Call the police. File a report. Don't let the HOA board handle it internally. Don't accept apologies and promises that it won't happen again. Criminal violations deserve criminal investigation. Internal HOA discipline isn't sufficient for breaking and entering. The fifth lesson is about the value of legal expertise. Judge Chen knew exactly what laws had been violated the moment she saw the footage. She knew how to document the crime. She knew how to file reports properly. She knew how to pursue both criminal and civil remedies. Not everyone has that expertise. But you can hire it. If your rights are violated, consult with a lawyer immediately. Don't try to navigate complex legal situations alone. The sixth lesson is that holding people accountable benefits the entire community. Judge Chen could have quietly resolved this. She could have accepted an apology and moved on. But she pursued full legal accountability. That decision protected other residents. It exposed a pattern of behavior. It resulted in policy changes that protected everyone. Sometimes pursuing justice isn't just about your own situation. It's about preventing future violations. The seventh lesson is that consequences matter. Patricia Reynolds faced criminal conviction, civil liability, and permanent damage to her reputation. Those consequences will follow her. They'll affect employment. They'll affect where she can volunteer. They'll appear on background checks. Real consequences create real deterrence. Other HOA presidents seeing this outcome will think twice before overreaching their authority. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever suspected your HOA entered your property without permission? Have you experienced HOA overreach? Have you dealt with HOA officials who believed they had more authority than they actually did? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story helped you understand your rights better, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more content about HOA accountability, property rights, and legal protections for homeowners. And remember this. No title gives anyone the right to violate your privacy. No position puts anyone above the law. No HOA bylaw overrides your constitutional rights. Know your rights. Document everything. And don't hesitate to pursue legal remedies when those rights are violated. Patricia Reynolds thought her position protected her. Judge Chen proved that no one is above the law. Not even HOA presidents who think they are.